Hey Kings, and welcome back to the Augustus Maximus channel for some more Empire Total War, playing as Greece with the Minor Factions Revenge mod. And today again post-commentary, because I think it fits the format of the Total War playthrough quite well. Otherwise, again, these individual episodes where mostly we just focus on industrial build-up would be roughly an hour long, where not much actually happens in terms of expansion or individual aspects that are actually important when it comes to achieving our goal. That is, rebuilding the Eastern Roman Empire, or just the Empire of the Romans, or the Greek part of the Roman Empire, whichever way you want to call it. It's gonna happen. And so the industrial build-up it takes quite a while, because again we are running on this low taxation model of economy, which in some aspects it makes the game a little bit more challenging, which I appreciate. Never really try this sort of very low taxation, basically zero almost taxation approach, but it makes the individual cities you capture build up quite a bit faster. Again, they grow faster, and the public order issue is resolved almost immediately whenever you capture a new settlement. And yeah, that's basically the main bonus of running this low taxation model. And I quite appreciate it actually right after the last episode, when we actually captured Constantinople or Istanbul, whatever you want to call it. It's historically accurate again to call it Constantinople, because even the Ottomans didn't really call it Istanbul. It was only renamed officially Istanbul after the First World War, when the Ottomans basically collapsed, and the governing region again, or the political entity that governed over the city, became Turkey, or the Republic of Turkey, whatever you want to call it. And then they renamed it, Ataturk actually renamed it to Istanbul. There's previously obviously called Constantinople, or the Turkish equivalent to it, or the international equivalent to it, whatever you want to say. Quite a bit of a ramble about a random city. But yeah, after we captured Constantinople in the last episode, the public order issue was actually, there wasn't one really. We had maybe one turn. I skipped over like 2 turns between recordings, and in those 2 turns I had maybe one small riot, and then nothing. No resistance basically to our rule at all, which was actually quite curious. Because it seems that the public order is not culturally relevant when it comes to Empire Total War or Napoleon Total War, if I remember correctly. And I do quite appreciate it, because the Ottomans, or the Ottomans in general, where you're talking about Empire Vanilla or this mod, but I think specifically in this mod as well, they do tend to build up the sort of region of Istanbul quite a bit when it comes to the public order development. They don't necessarily industrialize their regions, which is something that I noticed. The industry buildings tend to be extremely underdeveloped, which means that you actually don't even run into any public order issues at all, because obviously industrialization in this game, and especially in this mod, does give you a hefty public order penalty. And that's obviously, historically relevant. It's also relevant to the game, but it's curious that the Ottomans wouldn't build up anything like that. Instead, they actually build up the public order buildings, which means that whenever we capture a settlement, the public order issue is basically non-existent, or at least immediately resolved. And that makes this campaign actually a tad bit more, don't want to say easier, but it makes it more interesting and less tedious, I would say, because in Empire Total War, the public order issues are, in comparison with, for example, Rome 2 or Attila Total War, where you can have provincial decrees, essentially, like bread and circuses, which gives you more food, and it makes the population happier. In Empire Total War, there was nothing like that. You could only build suppression buildings and have a large garrison in the city. I think the generals also influence that, but it makes the population essentially happier only if you build repression buildings or cultural buildings, or have a large army sitting in there. There is no like provincial decree or anything like that. And for example, in Warhammer 2, obviously have the various character effects because it's more of an RPG experience. So you could tailor your generals to be more public order friendly. There's nothing like that in Empire Total War, obviously. So it's actually much appreciated from the Greeks, from the Greeks to the Ottomans that they didn't even try to industrialize. That's a difficult word, and they only built basically public order buildings. And what's curious about that is that basically right now we've gone through all the worst regions, or at least regions that have the worst public order issues, that being the regions within the Balkans, like Bulgaria and Serbia, and to a certain extent even the Greek territories, but we started in them and we have no public order issues there. So this is going to be an interesting campaign. And I also want to talk about a little bit about maybe the further achievements or further goals after we re-established the Eastern Roman Empire, because it's actually going quite smoothly. I thought that at the beginning, especially when we only had 2 territories and we couldn't really afford even one army essentially, and I thought that the Ottomans would put up quite a bit of a resistance. I thought that actually achieving the goal of the Eastern Roman Empire would be quite a bit difficult. But now actually looking at it, I think we might want to, if the opportunity presents itself, I think we might want to actually extend a little bit and try to, for example, recreate Justinian's sort of vision of the Eastern Roman Empire, the Roman Empire, where we actually try and go for Sicily, or the 2 Sicilies as it's known in the game, and basically conquer the lower portion of the Italian peninsula, and then maybe push forward, even capturing Rome and some bits of northern Africa, for example, Tunis and former Carthage territories, essentially. So that I think is an interesting stretch goal. And maybe instead of that, we could actually go down the Alexander the Great route and try to go to India, which is actually very much doable. Very much doable within Empire Total War, because obviously you have a direct land route to and direct land connection to India and the game from the Middle East, so it actually makes sense. So I think those are our 2 options. I'm more inclined to go with the Alexander the Great route, because it would be at least a little bit more interesting. Sort of staying in Europe and battling it out with European nations is obviously reasonable enough when it comes to the strategy of how to actually approach the campaign. However, I think it's not quite unique when it comes to stuff we're actually trying to do here. We're trying to sort of recreate the glory days of Greece, and I think that while Justinian is very much sort of a part of that glory and part of that great history, I think that the sort of legacy of Alexander the Great is sort of more... Well, it's more widely known for one. It's more prestigious, I guess. And overall, I think it would just make for a more interesting campaign. If I ever return to Empire Total War, which I'm very much inclined to do because I actually really like the game, I think that I could play as some sort of Italian state and try to recreate the Roman Empire from there. For example, playing as in this mod, you could play as, for example, the Italian states. So first we could try and recreate Italy, and then push on forward and try to recreate the West Roman Empire, or just the Roman Empire in general. I think that would be interesting. But here we actually see that the Ottomans are trying to sort of push us back at least a little bit. For some reason, they sent a half-beaten, really battered at least, Ottoman army our way, and the composition of it is almost exactly the stuff you would expect if you were paying attention to the Ottoman armies in our previous episodes. Is that it's mostly melee infantry with carbine cavalry, and that's sort of a lot of very heavy artillery, which again is a very curious composition of an army, because it doesn't really have very much synergy. It has synergy if you play it correctly, but the AI, obviously being the AI, it never really tries to do anything with it. In this case, they do actually leave out the heavy artillery, which is the only thing that actually might hold you back at least a little bit, because melee infantry in Empire Total War is at such a large disadvantage compared to line infantry that it's not even a valid unit to ever use. In Carbine Cavalry, while the Ottoman Carbine Cavalry actually does have greater range than my line infantry, because the AI is terrible, we always get to just dismantle them. So I think their army composition, again, is another part why this entire experience is actually going quite well. But onto the conquest portion of this episode, and we are going to take the entirety of Asia Minor, because it is only a one province state. It's one province state. It's a singular province. The entirety of Asia Minor is a singular province, which is something that it's a tendency that Empire Total War does suffer from. For example, in France, almost the entirety of France is just a single province, except for Alsace-Lorraine, which is sort of, you can argue, a German province, kind of, sort of. But here we use I use more rather, sort of a cheesy tactic where we essentially just besiege the city and then just beat the surrounding armies with an additional army. So very easily. It's sort of an old trick, and I think it works basically in every single Total War game. But might as well save, right? And the casualties, I think, are actually quite a bit worse than in vanilla Empire Total War when you auto-resolve, because the units are larger. The units are larger in this mod, and so while the casualties might look actually quite terrible, like you take 1,000 losses from a quick auto-resolve, it's actually reasonable if you take into consideration that that you just have large units. You, instead of wielding a 2,000-man army, you actually wield like 7,000 men or 6,000 men, so that those 1,000 losses will actually be replenished quite a bit, quite swiftly compared to the standard tactic. But when it comes to actually taking Asia Minor, the approach of actually just letting the enemy starve itself, or the enemy starve themselves, and then waiting for them to sally out is basically the best option you have against the Ottomans, because again they wield this enormous force of melee infantry. It just makes sense for you to wait them out and then just let them run at you. In combination with their extremely heavy artillery, which you can just deploy outside the range of, and because the Ort guns they aren't mounted, and so they can't move at all, they're basically fixed artillery, you can just deploy outside of their effective range, or just move out of their effective range, and if the enemy is attacking you, then they have to attack you, and if they can't move the heavy guns, then those heavy guns don't do anything throughout the entire game, and the AI actually uses the crew of those mounted guns as additional melee infantry, which is quite interesting, but I suppose it goes well with their build, kind of, sort of. They definitely have more of a use for them than sort of the standard European armies with a lot of line infantry. So it's sort of a standard approach that we took basically both in Serbia and also Istanbul. And as per usual, they did actually sally out, and we do actually have quite a significant numerical advantage. However, due to how Empire Total War works, because we have a full stack, we can only use one stack at a time, essentially. It's not controlling a large army, and they do have some decent musket units, so let's take a look how they performed. Or I would say that if it wasn't a night map and we could actually see anything. So yeah, it's a night battle, and it looks terrible. I think this is something that's only in the mods, at least. If it's in vanilla Empire Total War, I've never actually played a night battle before, and so this was kind of a shock to me. Like, really, a night battle? And so it looks absolutely abysmal. You can't necessarily see anything, and it's just basically making the skybox black and just darkening everything, making everything sort of dark blue. And unfortunately, you can't really see anything, so I'll spare you the pain and just tell you that we use the usual tactic of just letting them charge us. And as you would expect at this point, it's very effective. But basically, now that they've wasted almost all of their, the entirety of their army on this sort of sally out attack. It means that there's basically no garrison within the city, and now we can very safely take it. We could obviously just wait it out, then let them starve, let them surrender, but then there's the danger of them selling out again, and me having to play another night battle. And so I just thought I'd just take the losses. If we lose some units, then I'll lose some units. It doesn't really matter. I'll just take it on the chin, but I'm not playing another night battle, because that was actually terrible. I couldn't see anything. It was dark. They had carabine cavalry, and I mean, the strategy didn't change. We just camped it outright. But that sort of peak Empire Total War, no matter the situation, if you just have a good and long enough line, you just win. And so that's that. But a majority of the units are spent, so I think I just actually switched the generals around here, because that army was quite beaten. And so yeah, there we go. Just auto-resolve it. And now, basically, since we own the entirety of Asia Minor, we sort of resemble a very late, not a very late, but sort of a late Byzantine Empire, more or less, when they only had the Balkans and Asia Minor, and they didn't have anything in the Middle East per se. They didn't have the Levant at all conquered. So now we sort of resemble a Byzantine Empire, or at least basically the Byzantine Empire you can form in, for example, Hoi 4. With the release of Battle for the Bosporus, the only real regions you need is Greece, and Asia Minor are basically the Republic of Turkey, or Turkey itself. And so now we can officially call ourselves the Empire of the Romans, because I think it's a much nicer term in terms of historical relevance compared to like the Byzantine Empire, which, you know, it's sort of a false term. But so yeah, we're the Roman Empire officially right now. I'm sort of declaring it, even though the game says the Kingdom of Greece, or just Greece. It's actually we're Roman now. We're actually Romans, and so yeah, we have a legit claim on all those lands that the Ottomans now hold. This is less about just securing our fronts. This is about reclaiming our lands. And so now we have some sort of de jure justification for all of this rapid conquest that we're getting. And I should really check what kind of diplomatic penalties this is giving me, because in Empire Total War and Napoleon Total War, especially Napoleon Total War, but if you conquer too many territories too quickly, in Empire and Napoleon, you get major diplomatic penalties for sort of rapid expansion, aggressive expansion. This is something that's very strong in Napoleon Total War, but you also see it in Empire Total War. So I'm gonna have to check after this this recording whether we have any sort of significant penalties for this or not, and especially after we conquer the entirety of the Ottoman Empire, what kind of penalties we're going to have if we really plan to push even further forward with either the Justinian or the Alexander model. Probably the Alexander model, because we're playing as Greece after all. Well, we're playing as Rome now, but maybe the Romans in the 18th century would have appreciated Alexander more, and they would have left Italy be Italy. But anyway, Kings, thanks for watching this episode, and see you next time.